Paranoia was a mod for the original Half-Life, developed by the aptly named Paranoia team, which was a short and too spooky for me journey where you played as a Russian Special Forces soldier sent into some kind of underground facility. Here you'd uncover a deadly virus and have to fight your way through dimly lit tunnels past mutants and zombies. It was short, but whilst it lasted it was enjoyable and it pushed the GoldSrc engine to its absolute limits visually. And on top of all of that, it was free, making it even more enticing. The sequel, Paranoia 2 Savior, was instead developed by a group called KPL and released in 2015, running on something called the Zash 3D engine, which is a heavily modified GoldSrc engine. But the visuals is about all they've improved because aside from that, this game is kind of a train wreck. Paranoia was this really tightly crafted and genuinely creepy journey through a series of dark and dingy environments based off real-world Russian architecture. It had great sound design, clever monster designs, and just the kind of polish you don't really see all that much in Half-Life mods. Paranoia 2 I think takes place after the events from the first game, but to be honest, I'm not even sure if that's the case, and I don't even know if I'm playing as the same character or someone else. After a short prologue where your character wakes up in some kind of abandoned hospital, the game then flashes back where you're with a squad of soldiers, again heading into the complex from the first game, where things again turn to absolute shit. Regardless of how muddled the story can be, and it is muddled at times, one thing Paranoia 2 has just done remarkably well is craft this unsettling and believable game world. Visually, the game is such a huge step up from the original mod with new shaders, dynamic lighting, and higher polygon counts for weapon and character models. If you play a lot of FPS games though, you'll probably see a few assets here and there that have been borrowed, shall we say, from other shooting games. One of the models used for a boss fight, for instance, is literally taken from Return to Castle Wolfenstein. The sound effect for the spiders you kill is from the Trites in Doom 3, and I could have sworn the running animations for some of the Russian soldiers is taken from the Stalker series as well. But still, there's quite a bit of content on offer here, and some of the areas in the game still look pretty good. Seeing a hazard suit wearing zombie slide around a nearby corner with its arms outstretched towards the player still provides for some pretty decent jump scares. It manages to capture that horror feeling pretty damn well, which is kind of what you'd want for something labelling itself as a horror game. Combine that with the clever usage of sound and music and you've got a pretty scary game at times, often juxtaposed with those cheesy moments when heavy metal music kicks in as you're gunning down waves of enemies. At this point I wouldn't have been surprised if Disturbed's Get Down with the Sickness started playing too. Now Paranoia 2 doesn't just dip its toes into the murky waters of survival horror, it dunks its whole legs in. And there's moments in this game that are textbook survival horror. Like a lot of survival horror games, damage you take from enemies is super high, particularly melee damage, and you can only take a handful of hits before dying. This kind of carries across to the placement of healing items in the game world. I mean, I think I came across maybe 3 or 4 health kits the entire campaign, most of which came at the end of the game during the moments when you're in the most combat, so you'd expect to see them. You get maybe half a dozen or so painkillers throughout the game as well, which are items you can stock up on and use when need be. But these things recover an absolute slither of health and are bugger all effective in the long run, and you'll need to burn through like 3 or 4 to get your health full again. It skates a pretty thin line between being survival horror and just being stingy, and that's the kind of thing that's left up to the personal preference of the person playing. I mean, one person might enjoy that kind of sparse placement of important resources, thinking it heightens the tension or something like that, whereas someone else just might find it annoying that they've got to pussyfoot around with barely any health items. I didn't find it all that bad though, it did if nothing else kind of emphasise how dangerous the enemies in this game are, making them feel like a genuine threat, and there was definitely a sense of danger when taking them on. Like the first game, you can drop your helmet visor down, which I think is supposed to prevent you from being killed from headshots during combat, but it doesn't seem to lessen damage taken otherwise. It does feel pretty cool though, flipping this thing down before gunning down a bunch of zombified assholes with your machine gun. One of Paranoia 2's ultimate problems though is that the shooting just isn't very good. In fact, it's kinda terrible. It's kind of obvious the developers have taken influence from the Stalker games here, and maybe they've made the shooting ironically bad in some kind of homage to Stalker's own broken shooting mechanics. So you've got realistically modelled weapons which have to be fired with some sense of restraint to improve accuracy, and the inclusion of iron sights and frustratingly slow reload times. It's also got that familiar ballistics system that the so-called gun experts on the internet like to call realistic, where you aim down the iron sights at something and press the fire button and then the bullet just goes somewhere else entirely. Now I don't know all that much about guns, truth be told, but I think an AK that's being used by a Special Forces soldier is kept in well enough care that it's gonna go where it's intended most of the time, particularly against close to medium range targets.
It's only a game. Why you have to be mad?
In Paranoia 2, you'll also see things like enemies surviving multiple headshots from the PKM and the AK, grenades having an utterly woeful blast radius, and something as pivotal as the shotgun just feeling really underpowered and crappy. Not to mention it only holds 3 shells before having to be reloaded, during which time you can go off and make a cup of tea, or read War and Peace before the reload animation finishes. Anyway, this is really the most egregious fault, is the way they've ruined the shotgun. The shotgun is the staple of the FPS weapon roster, and in a game where you're killing zombies, it should be a key item in your arsenal. Not only do they give it to you late in the game, but when you finally get to use the damn thing, you see pretty quickly how underwhelming it is. This thing should just be the bringer of doom. When you hold a shotgun in your hands in any FPS game, enemies should fear and tremble in your presence. In Paranoia 2 though, you feel like you're better off throwing the damn thing at enemies instead of firing it. You've only got 7 weapons all up, a knife, which I've never really used, the pistol, 3 automatic weapons, the shotgun, and then grenades. And really the only useful weapons out of all of those are the PKM and the AKM you get later in the game. Everything else, like the shotgun, just kinda sucks, and it doesn't help that swapping between weapons is painfully slow, making it tedious to try to mix your weaponry up during combat.
Why you have to be mad?
Probably another major issue is the lack of any kind of real feedback when firing weapons. You can't often really see if a shot is connected, and though the weapons may look and sound good, they just don't feel all that powerful, because about the only time an enemy seems to react to getting shot is once you've dealt the killing blow. They really need to include some kind of lean button as well, because when you're up against other enemies with guns, you've got to kind of nudge yourself around corners to fire at them, but that also puts you right into the firing line, so to give out damage, you've kind of got to take it as well. A simple lean button here to reduce your visibility and exposure would have done wonders for the shooting. I mean, this was 2015 when this came out. It's not like leaning in a shooting game was an alien concept. Like Paranoia 1, Paranoia 2 is also a super short game. I think I finished the whole thing in around 90 minutes, which is actually less time than the first game took me to finish. Again, just when it seems like it's picking up some steam and really finding its footing, the whole thing just comes to a close. To make matters worse, there's no real resolution or closure to the story, and it ends on this cliffhanger ending that I guess we'll never see resolved. But look, it is kind of hard to criticize a game like this at the end of the day, because it is after all free. It's like the old saying goes, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Is Paranoia 2 perfect? Well, no it isn't. In a lot of ways, it's a worse off game than its predecessor. But as a standalone horror game, you know, it does kind of have its merits. I've always been kind of spooked out by games like this set in underground complexes and facilities, because it plays on that fear of being buried alive, where you're just constantly trapped in this environment without daylight that never seems to end. Paranoia 2 also plays on the fear of darkness, confined spaces and spiders, so it's got something for everybody. It's a shame it's not longer, it's a shame the shooting sucks, and it's a shame that it tells a story without an ending. But if you're broke as a joke and looking for something to quickly blast through around Halloween that won't cost you anything other than your time, well, you can definitely do worse.